Good morning, good afternoon, whatever your time zone, to everybody who has joined us today for this webinar. I'm Fionnuala Ní. I direct the Irish Network for VT Research, and it's my absolute pleasure to be chairing the second of this current series of global thrombosis research seminars. And it's a great pleasure to be introducing Dr. Skeith, who's going to be speaking about the pilot PARTUM trial and also pragmatic trials and challenges with complex study populations. So INVENT, as you all know, is a partnership of 11 national VTE and thrombosis research networks, which phenomenally supports and promotes international collaboration very successfully between networks to produce relevant, high-quality academic research. And you can see all our partners there. And also, we thank all of our past and current partners without whom this would not be possible. Next slide. So today I'm really excited to be showcasing the second of 3 seminars within this series, showcasing the results of 3 truly practice-changing INVENT-endorsed studies. And just a reminder that past recordings are available at the website. And today I welcome Dr. Leslie Skeith, who is a hematologist and an associate professor at the University of Calgary in Canada. Dr. Skeith's clinical and research interest is in the area of VTE prevention and treatment in pregnancy and the postpartum period, as well as in the area of antiphospholipid syndrome. She's a trailblazer and co-lead of the clinical trials platform for the Canadian VTE network, CanVector. Moreover, Dr. Skeith is an active member of the INVENT VTE network. And today, she will speak about pragmatic trials and challenges with complex study populations, lessons learned from the pilot PARTUM trial and qualitative research. Thank you, Dr. Skeith. And a reminder to all of you to submit your questions during the recording. We'll get through them at the end. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me and to really highlight the pilot PARTUM trial results and focus on lessons learned from the pilot PARTUM trial with a focus on pragmatic trials and talk a little bit more about qualitative research as part of your trials. This slide is just, really to showcase this is a team effort, and I'm presenting the results on behalf of the full pilot PARTUM team. Here are my disclosures. The pilot PARTUM trial was funded by CHR, our Canadian government research body, as well as the INVENT Research Network. And our qualitative sub-study was funded by CanVector and the Foundation for Women and Girls with Blood Disorders. So I'll give a little bit of background before I talk about the results and lessons learned. So as many of you know, pregnancy is an increased risk of venous thromboembolism, or VTE, blood clots, deep vein thrombosis and pulmonary embolism, complicating 1.2 in 1,000 deliveries. And that risk is similar between the antepartum and postpartum period, but because the postpartum period is shorter, there's a higher per day or daily VTE risk. That risk extends outwards of 12 weeks postpartum, but is greatest in the first 6 weeks, really the first 2 to 3 weeks. And as you can see, kind of tapers down in this nice figure here. VTE remains a leading cause of mortality during pregnancy and the postpartum period, especially in high-income countries. And postpartum DVT is a predictor of post-thrombotic syndrome. It's still common to have a large iliofemoral DVT postpartum. And it can be a challenging time in the postpartum period for both investigations with a newborn, going back to the emergency department, doing advanced chest imaging, as well as treatment and ongoing symptoms postpartum. We do know that there are certain groups that do benefit from postpartum thromboprophylaxis, and this is not who we're talking about today. This is anyone with a prior VTE, either unprovoked estrogen-associated or provoked VTE postpartum, should get prophylaxis with low molecular weight heparin, and those with higher risk thrombophilia as per the ASH 2018 guidelines as listed here. What I'm talking about today and the focus of the pilot PARTUM trial was that low to moderate risk thrombophilia or mild to moderate VTE risk factors. And that's because there's a lot of clinical and scientific equipoise in this area. Many of our clinical practice guidelines vary, and this is due to lower numbers of studies, few randomized controlled trials in this area. We rely on calculating risk estimates from case control and database studies, limited data, and expert opinion to form our clinical practice guidelines. This is just to showcase examples of trials for postpartum low molecular weight heparin prophylaxis after cesarean delivery, just to show that these are lower numbers of studies with varying treatment duration and follow-up, and that we really do need better data. This story started, actually, we'll go back in time to the PROSPER pilot trial led by my co-PI, Mark Roger. This was in Canada and the US over several centers, those with mild thrombophilia or 2 or more risk factors postpartum, randomizing within 36 hours postpartum to dalteparin or low molecular weight heparin versus a placebo injections for 21 days, followed by screening leg ultrasounds at 21 days, and then follow-up at 6 weeks and 90 days postpartum. And the focus was feasibility. Can this be successful for a much larger definitive trial for further evidence for low molecular weight heparin? So the primary outcome was a mean recruitment rate per month per site. And it was shown that the PROSPER pilot was not feasible. The recruitment was 0.7 patients per site per month on average. 6.6% of eligible patients provided consent. Major reasons were too busy, difficult for commitment, as well as the study drug, avoiding injections and not wanting the study drug or placebo for reasons. We don't give up in research. We go back to the drawing board. And so Mark Roger and his colleagues interviewed or surveyed, potential participants, revamped the trial design and shortened it to 10 days of injections based on feedback, and changing this to open label to avoid placebo injections. That meant the screening leg ultrasounds were at 10 days instead of 21 days with the same follow-up. And again, an outcome for feasibility for our Take 2 PROSPER pilot. Unfortunately, the trial was still not feasible with recruitment rate of 0.9 patients per site per month, slightly higher eligible patients who provided consent, but still not enough to move forward to a large definitive trial. So do not pass go, do not collect $200. Where do we go from here? We still don't give up. The rationale for the pilot PARTUM trial is our Take 3. And because the previous PROSPER pilot trial challenges limited a large low molecular weight heparin trial, at least in Canada and the US, we shifted a strategy to look towards aspirin. Over the last 10 years, there's been more high quality randomized trials looking at aspirin for non-inferiority compared to low molecular weight heparin or direct oral anticoagulants, often after a short lead-in. In those with higher risk populations after orthopedic surgery, and low-dose aspirin, unlike the direct oral anticoagulants, have an acceptable safety profile and is considered safe while breastfeeding. So the pilot PARTUM trial design was within 48 hours postpartum. Participants were randomized to low-dose aspirin, 81 milligrams in Canada, 80 milligrams in Europe versus matching placebo daily for 6 weeks, and then really trying to simplify things with a follow-up at 6-week visit or phone call and 90-day phone call, with again our focus being feasibility with a mean recruitment rate per month per site as our primary outcome. So we did change, instead of 36 hours, we extended this to 48 hours postpartum, changed the intervention to aspirin, and then made a pragmatic decision after getting much feedback and presentation to our CanVector colleagues to remove any barriers, removing additional blood work, removing screening like ultrasounds to focus on symptomatic VTE as our future large trial outcome. Here's the inclusion criteria. Those with one or more mild inherited thrombophilia or mild to moderate inherited thrombophilia or strict immobilization anytime during pregnancy, and or 2 or more risk factors in this larger group here. And this was by far the more common group, if you could imagine. And you could have combinations of the 2 groups or more than these listed risk factors. We excluded patients where there were more than 48 hours or more than 2 doses of low molecular weight heparin after delivery. Need for low molecular weight heparin or aspirin is judged by the local investigator, and some additional safety parameters for aspirin use. And really to showcase the power of collaboration, this was across 4 networks and 4 different countries with many more involved to make this possible. And I should put Invent kind of as the umbrella to connect us all between CanVector, Invite, the Dutch Thrombosis Network, and Innovate. All right, so shifting towards results of the pilot PARTUM trial, which is published in the Lancet Hematology, we screened over 10,000 individuals for eligibility. Not all of these patients had VTE risk factors, and the screening did vary by site. For example, in Calgary, every patient who delivered, we screened, whereas in other sites who had more sophisticated risk factor tools, such as in Ireland, they had more focused efforts. And we can see that of this larger group, over 1,000 patients met inclusion criteria, and 257 were enrolled and randomly assigned, as you can see here. The loss to follow-up was around, and withdrawn was around 5%. So our eligibility VTE risk factors, the majority, as I had mentioned, are in that larger or second group of combinations of moderate risk factors. There were 2% with inherited thrombophilia, either heterozygous factor V Leiden or prothrombin gene mutation. And the majority, if you can see here, are pre-pregnancy BMI equal or greater to 30, unplanned cesarean delivery and postpartum hemorrhage and preeclampsia, but fairly equal between the 2 groups. The number of VTE risk factors ranged from 1 to 5 in a participant, and 24% had 3 or more VTE risk factors, so going kind of above our minimum risk factors here. Here's additional baseline characteristics, and you can see are largely balanced by group. The age of around 34. You can see the distribution, majority in Canada, but participants from France, Ireland, and Netherlands. And looking at the type of delivery, the majority, so around half induction of labor for the type of labor, mode of delivery, cesarean delivery 84, 85%, and majority of those were unplanned deliveries. Our feasibility outcomes, we compared to the previous PROSPER pilot, we really did meet the majority of our feasibility targets or outcomes. Our mean recruitment was 6.3 patients per site per month, which was above our target of 4 patients per site per month, and over 30% of eligible patients provided consent. One issue that we did not meet our target was site approvals greater than 18 months to the ethics board or contract approvals. Less than 25% was our target, so trying to do this quickly. Unfortunately, this all happened during the COVID pandemic, and our documents were distributed in January, and the COVID pandemic declared a pandemic in March. So there was I think we do have a reason for this one feasibility outcome, and we did learn a lot about our processes. Just to highlight that clinical outcomes were really secondary, exploratory information. We are not powered in this pilot PARTUM trial to make any conclusions clinically. We did have one distal DVT in the placebo group, no major bleeds in either of the groups. 3 or 2% clinically relevant non-major bleeding is defined by ISTH criteria in the low-dose aspirin group, 1 or 1% in the placebo group, and minor bleeding as you see here. We had an a priori definition of important wound hematoma, either requiring intervention or greater than 100 centimeters squared, and neither group had any of these complications. We also asked questions about breastfeeding, and there were 93 infants who received any breast milk from participants in the low-dose aspirin group, and there were no concerning or related SAEs in this group. All right, so moving towards some lessons learned, which is kind of the fun part of this talk. I borrowed the P's of success from colleague and mentor Saskia Middledorp of patience, persistence, perseverance in the setting of challenges, and I'm adding positivity as well. This was really highlighted during the COVID pandemic. And I'll give an example from our Netherlands site just to showcase that patience that's needed. So our trial documents were sent to the site in January 2020. As you and I mentioned before, the COVID pandemic was declared in March. And so really there was a major pause. We really could not do anything from the research point of view. We later got regulatory and ethics approvals in April 2021. They did undergo an ethics amendment to align, internationally things like race, ethnicity, and making sure all the data, is collected. All that information across countries is important to align. So we did have an ethics amendment. The legal contract was finalized September 2022. And 2 years, December 2022, the site initiation visit and activation, they were ready to recruit. And what happened? Recruitment in the first month was 0. There were no participants recruited from the site in this first month, despite high efforts. And what happened? There was a new countrywide clinical practice guidelines came into practice in that same month that we had opened, and it really truly overlapped with the inclusion criteria of the pilot PARTUM trial. So what are our options? Are we defeated? Do we pause, close the site, or do we try to reverse new national guidelines at the recruiting hospital at AMC? So we opted for the latter approach. We paused recruitment after that 1 month of no enrollments, and it was really up to the team and the site and having meetings after meetings after meetings to put the guidelines on hold at the level of the hospital and institution. Relaunched PARTUM with our first patient recruited from the site. And then unfortunately, the IP expired, and we did have to stop the pilot at AMC, but after giving it a good test run with putting the clinical practice guidelines on hold. When the guidelines were in place, there were 22 excluded patients, 18 because of the need for low molecular weight heparin, so 0 were enrolled. And after the guidelines were paused, there were 5 enrollments in that first month, only 2 excluded for need for low molecular weight heparin. So just to showcase that perseverance. And that goes into my next lesson of knowing the local culture. I really like this quote, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." And without knowing on the ground what's happening locally with thromboprophylaxis, with postpartum, with guidelines, it's really difficult to be successful. We have to really think and embed within that local culture. And to highlight the impact of clinical practice guidelines, as a clinician, it's really helpful to look towards clinical practice guidelines in areas of uncertainty, summarizing evidence from the experts, But we also have to keep in mind that as a researcher, this becomes the culture. It becomes standard of care for ethics boards, regulatory authority, and quality metrics, especially around thromboprophylaxis in hospitals. And we do have a duty to advocate for better evidence. And when you are using or talking about clinical practice guidelines, it's important to look to the evidence grade and really show that there is still room for research. Here's an example across all of our sites for the pilot PARTUM trial, the impact. We were competing against local low molecular heparin guidelines, sometimes national guidelines at every site. For example, in Vancouver, it was the lead of the guidelines, of the SOGC guidelines, that was leading the study, and yet these guidelines were in practice. In Europe, in France, they restricted recruitment to only a low-risk subset and group due to an ethics committee decision that the larger group was too high risk to consider the placebo. In Ireland, it was the local investigator, decision where there was the subset of a low-risk eligible patients because of this concern for placebo. And I mentioned the example with the Netherlands with competing new low molecular heparin guidelines that were temporarily paused. But it is really hard to undo embedded clinical practice guidelines, widespread. Here's another, from my moderator, I'll pick on my moderator here, an example of our Ireland site. They have an excellent and have published extensively on the ThromboCalc score, which is a electronic risk score tool that have been embedded in clinical practice. The audit of the tool is greater than 99% compliance. And for every risk factor, there's an associated score based on best available data. And the stars are just highlighting the overlap with the pilot PARTUM eligibility criteria, where if you have a score of 4 to 9, it's thromboprophylaxis when hospitalized, 10 to 14, up to 7 to 10 days post-discharge of low molecular weight heparin, and 15 or more up to 6 weeks, or at the discretion of the hematologist, particularly around inherited thrombophilia. So how do we go from this, and how do we practically reconcile what's embedded into clinical practice with a placebo trial? This is our challenge with the pilot PARTUM trial. While there's scientific equipoise with limited data, does clinical equipoise truly exist because of these clinical practice guidelines? So after much decision and debate and discussion, we made a major trial design change to focus on a non-inferiority trial and asking the question, if aspirin is superior to placebo, will this truly change practice if the standard of care is low molecular weight heparin within our clinical practice guidelines? So our new or updated definitive trial will be a non-inferiority trial of low-dose aspirin, but 75 to 100 milligrams, depending on the country, versus usual care. And if aspirin is non-inferior at preventing VTE, then really the results will lead to greater acceptability by patients, providers, hospitals, guideline committees, and thus have a greater impact. And the last lesson I'd like to showcase and share is that the patient and provider voice matters. We completed a sub-study, a qualitative sub-study alongside the pilot PARTUM trial to identify these qualitative themes, both from patients and providers. And it really came down to this, that participants or patients were happy to participate in the pilot PARTUM trial. It was an easy ask. They wanted to help other parents if it aligned with their perception of VTE risk, and their care providers supported the trial. I think two really important kind of caveats or considerations. And here's a couple nice quotes and examples of the unique challenges in the postpartum period. For me, it was a traumatic birth experience, and then the baby wouldn't breastfeed and just everything going on at that time. And then being asked something when you're under so much stress as well, it's hard to clinically change your brain to be like, okay, Pros and cons, let's figure it out. And then another participant, I think maybe, had the experience not been as straightforward as it was, maybe I would have been a little bit more reluctant. What was really insightful from the provider comments, which I would also echo, is that the type of patients that we are looking to enroll in the PARTUM trial or pilot PARTUM trial are the more complicated deliveries that with additional VTE risk factors, making it that added challenge compared to maybe that straightforward delivery where there may be less of a role for thromboprophylaxis. And also just to echo the importance of the care providers. If I'd only seen the surgeon for 2 seconds and she came and asked me, I wouldn't have felt as comfortable. I think if my primary maternity provider had said to me, hey, you'd be a good candidate for this, I probably would have really listened to that. Just the importance of the relationship of the obstetric care provider and that important buy-in, that's really needed at the provider level. We also had further detail for reasons for non-consent in the larger study. And I think when we're thinking about patients not interested in research, overwhelmed or too busy, those top two, I think our challenge as researchers is how can we change the design for the full trial to make things even more simple to patients? We heard from a lot of feedback from patients as well as providers, what can we do differently? So our full PARTUM trial design changes will be to approach during pregnancy, give information ahead of time when possible, aware that many of the risk factors are still only occurring postpartum. So this is only possible for a subset of patients, but it is, acknowledged and possible. And we are changing the follow-up to having electronic postpartum questionnaires instead of the phone call or visit, asking similar questions, with a backup of having the phone call follow-up if there's a preference, participant or site preference, no answer despite a reminder, or in the questionnaires if they answer yes to certain questions such as seeking medical care, emergency department visits, new symptoms, then we would call to get more information. We also made a very practical decision not to return study medication bottles. In our pilot PARTUM data, the pill count was similar to self-report. So our updated Pragmatic full PARTUM trial design, we still have randomization up to 48 hours, but screening and consent can occur during pregnancy or the postpartum period. Low-dose aspirin for 6 weeks versus a usual care low molecular weight heparin regimen. Aware that this does vary according to institution, and we will be keeping this into account for our statistical plan. And the follow-up being by questionnaire with phone calls as needed, in addition to a chart review as well. So just with the last few minutes, I wanted to talk more about qualitative research. And I really think this is a powerful opportunity to include the patient voice into a trial. Qualitative research provides rich, in-depth data, context, and insight into these complex issues. In this case, this is recruitment and participation in a postpartum thromboprophylaxis trial. And I think when we talk about patient voice or patient partner or patient partners giving insight into a trial, a patient is just a person, and there's many different people and many different perspectives. So I think it's an even more to highlight that there are many voices we want to bring, to make our research stronger, to have patient-oriented research and answers that matter to patients. More information just for practicality about the research methods. We had 19 patient and 13 provider semi-structured 30-minute interviews. Most were by phone, although some provider interviews were in person. And we had a combination of pilot PARTUM participants as well as 10 non-participants who declined the pilot PARTUM trial. The project was led by Dr. Lauren Andrew, who was an obstetrics resident at the time, with mentorship by Dr. Taryn Taylor, who is an Canadian obstetrician and true qualitative expert. And this is a great way. It is difficult to include trainees in large randomized trials, but to have a sub-study or a project where a resident can get involved, it was a really nice fit. And also to highlight the importance of having qualitative expertise on your team. I have some expertise in qualitative research, but really looking to an expert to give us further guidance was needed. Practically, the pilot PARTUM protocol had a sub-study section, so we thought of this and planned it right from the beginning, and we also had a separate informed consent form. In retrospect, maybe it would be helpful to have a separate protocol or a separate ethics submission if there's plans to make changes. It's a little bit easier than having to amend the full, protocol and amendment of the ethics for the full trial, something to consider in the future. And for the participant approach, we really need a variety of perspectives. So I think that important of who are you interviewing, who are you involving? It was actually the patients who declined the pilot PARTUM trial that we were most interested in. There is still bias to those who want to participate in research. Those that decline all research, we are still missing their voice, but this at least allows us to explore those complex issues further. And practically, we approach patients after the pilot PARTUM trial approach. This was all in Calgary at a single center. We gave them information about the pilot PARTUM trial when they were on the ward, had time to review the pilot PARTUM trial, came back, and at that time of the decision was that follow-up question about the sub-study. So we did not, in tandem, give them both the study information because it would be a lot of information. And physicians were invited by a templated email. Interviews were recorded and transcribed verbatim using a research company and analyzed independently by 2 researchers. I would highly recommend, if you're new or thinking of qualitative research, the Braun and Clark Thematic Analysis Practical Guidebook. It's a really nice kind of first start. We use reflexive thematic analysis with an inductive approach, really where we go from line by line coding of the transcripts, moving to a refined conceptual themes. Using the in vivo software really is a tool for those 2 researchers to work through the transcripts and merge the themes over time. And we reported the study and publication with the CORIC Q checklist. Just some thoughts, final thoughts about qualitative research issues. Unlike the quantitative research and randomized trials where everything is very objective, we all come to the table with certain information, and that includes our researchers. So there's this concept of insider status as an interviewer, that is both good and bad, and we really just have to reflect and identify the positions of the researchers. Lauren Andrew was an obstetrics gynecology resident, so knew this insider lingo, was very comfortable and talking with her staff, physicians, as well as patients about this information. But it's also taking a pause and recognizing when that could be a barrier and how to mitigate that during the interviews. And similarly, our second researcher was Alexandra Garvin, who was not the local trial coordinator, but our central PARTUM trial coordinator, expanding her skill set. And so comes with a completely different lens as a trial coordinator, for 10 plus years. So just being aware, acknowledging those perspectives is important within that qualitative research lens. And I think qualitative research also is inherently context specific. So this was a sub-study in Calgary in Canada. Does this apply to Ireland, to France? Probably not. That this is more context specific compared to our ideas with quantitative research. So to summarize, and in conclusion, the postpartum period poses unique challenges for randomized trials. We have the 3 and now 4 Ps, patience, persistence, perseverance, and positivity. And I really do feel strongly a pragmatic trial design and a strong team are crucial really for success. And there is significant value of incorporating a qualitative study alongside your trials. And I'm happy to be that point person or resource if you have a question about qualitative research and how to embed it within a randomized trial. My last slide is unrelated and is a plug for our VTE core outcome set survey. This is non-pregnant adults, so this is separate from our current talk, but we are compiling and getting further information about what are the most important outcomes for VTE treatment for research we want to capture. So please take the time to scan, visit our website to complete our survey. We really need your help. We need more responses from around the world. So thank you for considering this request. And with that, I'll stop my share and open it up for questions, and feel free to email anything about the pilot PARTUM trial, interest in the full PARTUM trial, or anything you have questions about for qualitative research. I'm happy to connect. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you, Dr. Skeith, for a most phenomenal talk. Your leadership has been breathtaking. You've addressed one of the most challenging and important clinical issues facing us as a multidisciplinary thrombosis and obstetric community. So thank you. It's been a privilege to watch you operate. It's been a privilege to see you assemble this group and deliver an incredibly impactful pilot trial that will no doubt lead to tremendous impact in the future. And speaking of which, would you mind outlining just how great the impact of this trial could potentially be on patients, not only patients, but also, you know, health services and governments and ministries around the world, given the use of limerick heparin? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. And as I had mentioned, we have our clinical practice guidelines of varying duration, different risk factors. I think having some further consistency, further evidence will really help. And if aspirin is non-inferior to our usual care standard of low molecular weight heparin, I think this really opens up the potential for impact. Aspirin is available over the counter, not quite cheap, not costly compared to low molecular weight heparin injections. The impact to low and middle income countries will also be really significant if this is shown to be non-inferior. And really, it's just getting better data for our patients, where we have a handful of trials. The pilot PARTUM trial is now the largest postpartum thromboprophylaxis trial published, and our future large trial will be over 8,000 participants, over 11 countries, really showcasing that generalizability, and looking forward to getting further research.
It's deeply impressive, Dr. Skeith. And you spoke so eloquently. Just while we're waiting for another question to come up, I will, if you don't mind, I'll ask a few more questions. So you spoke so eloquently about the responsibility we have to these patients. And really, we're talking about every person who delivers a baby, you know, is potentially of relevance to the impact of this study. The responsibility we have as clinicians and as researchers. You spoke about the can't remember the terminology used, but guidelines and guidance statements, and how they can become dogma and can challenge the way we deliver clinical care to patients. What has you spoke a bit about your experience in facing the dogma of guidelines as you delivered this trial, and you still managed to do it. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about how you did it?
Yeah, I think that key, sharing what is the information behind the guidelines. So for each site, at least in Calgary, having ground rounds to our obstetricians, really understanding what's behind the guidelines to challenge and say that there is still room for research. We do still need, further and high quality research. I think is really important to get buy-in, get information about them. And there is also this practical piece where it is hard to undo guidelines that are embedded in clinical care. So that shift towards the trial design was a major pragmatic decision for, a large trial to have the arm being our usual care. But for the pilot partum, I think that importance of the local team for challenge and for other research areas too, being able to challenge the guidelines to say we do need more evidence. There are guidance, but this is not everything. I think really important for future research.
Yeah. And this is where the your leadership really shone forth, because it took courage and people had to trust you and the team to take on board these recommendations and to understand the impact of what was being planned. One can only imagine that the success of the full trial is likely to be very high, given what has been achieved under your leadership during the pilot partum phase. Dr. Skeith, it's been incredibly impressive. And you spoke about so the multi-stakeholder engagement and how you changed the design to make it a pragmatic trial. I can only imagine we know that will increase the feasibility hugely in Ireland for sure. But you also spoke to patients and worked and took on board their lives and their circumstances. Do you want to remind us a little bit about what has been done and how this is likely to further leverage success in the full trial phase?
Yeah, I'm really proud of our patient engagement throughout the pilot partum. In addition to our qualitative interview, we've had very engaged patient partner team, Susan Dubois, Lisa Duffett for our Canadian patient partners, and now for our full partum trial. Thank you to Anne-Marie from the CEO of Thrombosis Ireland and Irish Heart Foundation, I believe. And so this, I think having their input and really from the beginning on the design in every grant, review of the protocol, review of the informed consent form, review of all patient-facing documents from posters to cards, really getting that focus. We also are soon to launch a new website for the full partum trial, and it is really focused on speaking to patients, giving them information both about the trial, but also just about information about VTE risk. This may be the first time someone may be thinking about VTE when they're talking about the trial. So to provide information, even if they don't take part in the full partum trial. And then as I had mentioned, doing this qualitative research piece, as well as with the providers and getting input kind of from on the ground obstetricians as well. So really proud to continue our patient partner team.
Yeah, your engagement with so many different specialities has been phenomenal, and your involvement of patients is exemplary. Because with it, nothing, as they say, as Thrombosis Ireland say, no research without me. What if I could just ask, if anybody does have a question, to please put it into the Q&A box, and we will keep an eye out for it. But I can't resist to continue the conversation, Dr. Skeith, while we're waiting. May I ask a challenging question? You have now observed practices across the Atlantic and various other parts of the world. What is your view on the thresholds for thromboprophylaxis postpartum in different countries? Are we all doing the same thing? Is it wildly different? Are we over-prescribing in some areas? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a good and hot topic for sure. I do think that there are some differences, in some cases for those higher risk individuals. I think many are doing the same thing and offering that extended thromboprophylaxis. It's those with these kind of in between, these mild to moderate, 2 to 3 risk factors where there can be differences in practice. Often that on the clinical practice guidelines, there is some form of low molecular weight heparin the duration may vary, the certain risk factors may vary, and it does vary by country. And so for the full PARTUM trial, we will be stratifying randomization by country, taking into account these differences and doing a subgroup analysis. But it really stems to what the national or kind of local guidelines say. So if for example, the RCOG guidelines offer more low molecular heparin than our Canadian SOGC guidelines, when you look at the guideline, and that is probably reflective of clinical practice, and really just highlighting the need for further research. Not to say we have to be changing all the guidelines to be the same without extra research, but just to keep this in mind as we're doing our full PARTUM trial. I don't know if you have any thoughts as well. You've seen, maybe in different perspectives from the Irish site, from the pilot trial, trying to reconcile a placebo group versus your clinical guidelines that are embedded. It's neat to hear your perspective as well.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Skeith. Yes, and I know that in the UK and Ireland, our threshold traditionally for commencing thromboprophylaxis postpartum has been quite high. So we know that a large proportion of people who deliver are given thromboprophylaxis with low molecular heparin and without any high quality data. So the impact, this is why I'm so in awe of the impact that you will deliver for countless thousands of patients, certainly in our country every year. We know from our own experience with thrombocalc data at our own institution, we have about 9,000 deliveries every year. So from memory, I think over 30% of patients had several VTE risk factors. They wouldn't all qualify for prophylaxis, but it just shows how feasible this trial will be when you look at your inclusion criteria in the Pragmatic design going forward. I really do think the full trial has a very high chance of success, Dr. Skeith. So thank you for your leadership and your perseverance. It's such an important research question, and I think every patient who's involved, from our perspective, has said the same thing and has congratulated you on the future impact. And in terms of opportunities for early career individuals who have been involved, you did involve Dr. Andrew, who did a phenomenal job on the qualitative research. What was your experience in motivating the next generation?
I think it was a great way to get Dr. Andrew involved. It was a large and still full project to do, from protocol to publication, but just being part of a randomized trial. And at many of our sites, we had PhD students or training doctors or kind of subspecialty within obstetric and maternal fetal medicine. So even if they're not the main site lead, being able to be involved, see randomized trials, I think is really crucial to see how much work goes in behind the scenes for every step of the way. I think it's a great way to get exposure and to get younger early career researchers involved in trials. And that's certainly when I did a fellowship in Ottawa, my getting exposure and seeing these trials in action to see it. It is certainly, it's possible to do. So absolutely.
Yeah, and certainly you've highlighted one of what I believe to be one of the key priorities of the Invent Network and of Convector. And can you maybe elaborate on how the PARTUM trial aligns with other strategic objectives of the Invent Network, Dr. Skeith?
Yes, good question. I think it's really bringing the researchers together from our different networks, from our, trying to align globally. We have so much to learn from each other. And I've certainly learned a lot about the European GDPR and how to do research in France, how that changes in the Netherlands, in Ireland. And so being able to share our experiences on both on the document regulatory side, but patient side. Anyway,
Yeah.
it's so great to be able to connect, and then you get to work with a lot of great people.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, Dr. Skeith, because in addition to planning and delivering one of the most important pilot trials in history, and setting the stage for now one of the most important full trials that our community has faced. You've also brought together a really strong and powerful community of all intergenerational community of thrombosis researchers who are interested in pregnancy research. So it's so interesting that when any of us would have given talks about pregnancy thrombosis research over the past 10 years, we would have spoken at length about the challenges and how difficult it is. And somehow you've changed that. And so has Dr. Middledorp and Dr. Roger. What a team. You've really broken glass ceilings and made the path forward so much easier. And I think the collective experience is really powerful. Thank you. And thank
Great.
you
Thank
to
you very
everybody
much.
else who's led on such
That's
trials.
right. I was going to say I'm not absolutely not the only one, and with mentorship from Saskia and Mark is really important. But being able to shape our group, so we start small, which is still 4 countries for the pilot
Mhm.
PARTUM trial, but expanding, aiming for 11 countries, bringing everyone together within pregnancy VTE research within the umbrella of Invent to continue
Yes.
I think is the goal, and really exciting.
Yeah. It's phenomenal. Talking again about the impact of this study. In Ireland we have a population of about 5 million. So this research will be relevant to over 30,000 women every year, women and people who deliver babies every single year. So when you scale that up over the countries in which it's feasible to do this, in hopefully very much a global initiative, the impact is phenomenal. Leslie, I haven't calculated what it will be in a country like Canada or, the US, for example, but it's going to be amazing. So with that, once the trial is done, the next stage will be, implementation of the results and their incorporation into guidelines. For the first time, we'll have high quality evidence for how to handle these multiple risk factors. So, what are your plans?
Yeah, I think having that strong knowledge mobilization or knowledge translation component with both
Yeah.
from the patient side, from provider side, but also many of our team leads are part of the clinical practice guidelines at their different institutions, nationally, internationally. So I do think that, and with CanVector, we have an affiliated clot plus service for getting research out
Mm.
to patients, providers through
Brilliant.
patient
Yeah.
organizations of Thrombosis
Yeah.
Ireland, Thrombosis Canada,
Yeah.
and many others, lots of potential to showcase and through the website
Amazing.
and others. But it is already thinking about those plans are really important when setting up the larger trial.
Yeah. I'm 100% confident you will deliver. What a
Thank
team.
thank
What a
you so
team.
much. Yeah, looking forward to it. Absolutely.
Yeah. So look, I don't see any open questions in the Q&A. If there is anybody who wishes to make a comment or ask a question, speak now, or use no, I don't think you can use the chat function, apologies. But if not, I just congratulate you on your scientific brilliance, but also your leadership, Dr. Skeith. Following in the footsteps of many others who have inspired both of us deeply over the years. So thank you, Dr. Skeith. Thank you to all our partners, and thank you to all of you who've joined us today and who will listen back. We would remind you all that the Invent V2E Dragon's Den competition is planned for June 22nd, which will be a lot of fun as always, featuring some practice-changing research in real life, and meet and greet at ISGH on June 23rd at 6:30 p.m. I'm sure it'll be a lot of fun. So with that, thank you very much, Dr. Skeith. Thank you to Invent VTE for organising today's seminar. And we'll both say goodbye to you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.